Hello and welcome to our online press conference. I'm Tom Pelton, Director of Communications for the Environmental Integrity Project. We're a nonprofit organization that serves as America's environmental watchdog, holding polluters and governments accountable to protect public health and the environment. Today, we are releasing a new report, The Steel Industry's Hazardous Air Pollution and the Threat of Regulatory Rollbacks. You can find it on our website at www.environmentalintegrity.org. Today, we're going to have 5 speakers, then open it up to questions from reporters. Journalists, if you have a question as we go along, please click on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen and note that you have a question. And then at the end of the presentation, I'll call you, unmute you, and then please also unmute yourself to ask your question. First, we'll have Jen Duggan, Executive Director of the Environmental Integrity Project, then Kiam Ansari, Executive Director of Valley Clean Air Now, next, Jermaine Patterson, a resident of Clairton, Pennsylvania, then Terry Stiegel, former steel worker and resident of Highland, Indiana, and finally, Charlie Powell of the Alabama-based People Against Neighborhood Industrial Contamination. But first, we'll have Jen Duggan, Executive Director of the Environmental Integrity Project. Go ahead, Jen.
Thank you, Tom. I want to thank the EIP team who prepared this analysis of air pollution data from the steel industry, all of our speakers today, and our partners across the country who are working every day to reduce pollution from steel manufacturing. And welcome to everyone who's joined the call. We really appreciate you being here with us today. Steel manufacturing is an essential part of modern life and the American economy. At the same time, the industry releases a significant amount of hazardous air pollution, including benzene, a carcinogen, and other harmful pollutants that can jeopardize the health of steel plant workers and residents in the communities near steel plants. The tragic explosion last week at the U.S. Steel Clairton Coke Works facility in western Pennsylvania that killed 2 workers and injured at least 10 others makes clear the industry needs more accountability and oversight, not less, to protect workers and neighbors. The cause of that specific accident is still under investigation, but the broader issue is unfortunately not news. Working in and living near steelmaking facilities can be dangerous because of serious accidents that have immediate consequences, as well as long-term public health impacts that can come from breathing in pollutants that are released from these plants, like benzene, chromium, fine particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides. According to industry-reported emissions data, the 20 steelmaking facilities we examined for our report released nearly 2.4 million pounds of hazardous air pollutants, nearly 290,000 tons of criteria air pollutants, and 43.3 million metric tons of greenhouse gases in 2023 alone. One thing I would really like to highlight is that self-reported emissions of hazardous air pollutants can often underestimate the actual emissions that are released by industrial facilities. These emissions are often the result of leaks from pipes, valves, and other equipment, or flaring of waste gases, which is difficult to, and sometimes impossible to measure directly. Reported emissions based on calculations may leave out certain emission sources, for example, unexpected emissions, or include uncertainties that can lead to significant differences between reported and actual emissions that workers and communities downwind are breathing in. For example, reported emissions may indicate the facility is effectively controlling benzene releases, while the actual emissions make clear there's an equipment leak or other problem the company may not be aware of, causing unhealthy levels of benzene to drift into nearby communities. This is why requirements to measure hazardous air pollutants at the perimeter of steelmaking facilities and to take action to reduce pollution are so important to protect worker and neighbor health and well-being. These are often referred to as fenceline monitoring and cleanup standards. And in 2024, the Biden administration's Environmental Protection Agency put in place these common sense rules for integrated iron and steel plants, as well as related coke oven facilities like the U.S. Steel Clairton Coke Works plant. These new rules, called National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants, or NESHAP rules, require steel mills and coke plants to install rings of air pollution monitors around the perimeter of the plant so that managers can measure actual emissions and take action to identify and fix pollution problems when certain action levels are exceeded for benzene for coke oven plants and for chromium for steel mills. Benzene can cause blood disorders, harm the immune system, and is a known cancer-causing agent with links to leukemia. Chromium can cause breathing problems, kidney and liver damage, and skin and eye irritation. One form of it, called hexavalent chromium, is a known carcinogen with links to lung cancer. These kinds of requirements are not new and they've been proven to be successful for other industries. Similar fenceline monitoring and cleanup standards for benzene emissions at petroleum refineries, for example, have been in place for nearly a decade now and have helped reduce benzene concentrations at refinery fence lines by 33% between 2019 and 2022, according to EPA. The number of refineries that have exceeded the action level has dropped from 10 refineries at the end of 2018 when the program began to 4 in 2024, which is the last full year of data for the program. So this is a proven technology that has demonstrated success in reducing hazardous air pollution emissions from facilities. Parts of the new rules for steelmaking facilities, including the fence line monitoring and cleanup standards, were supposed to take effect this year, but the Trump administration is trying to delay the rules and may eventually seek to eliminate them altogether. Delaying or derailing these common sense rules would deal a serious blow to public health and represents a betrayal of both the workers in steel mills and coke plants and the neighbors who live around them. EIP and our allies have filed lawsuits to challenge these delays. Today, we're going to hear from one of those steelworkers and also community members living downwind. And we're releasing a new report that explains why the air monitoring data collected and reported by industry at EPA's request show that these pollution control rules are absolutely necessary and must not be delayed. Our report, The Steel Industry's Hazardous Air Pollution, explains that the steelmaking industry collected monitoring data at facility fence lines and inside the perimeter of the plants above key health thresholds for benzene and chromium. For example, 11 of 12 air pollution monitors at the fence line of the U.S. Steel Clairton Coke Works plant detected 6-month average concentrations of benzene in 2022 and 2023 above a key health threshold for the pollutant, the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment standard for chronic or long-term exposure. The 6-month average at one of the monitors was 25.9 micrograms per cubic meter, which is 8 times higher than the chronic health standard of 3 micrograms per cubic meter. Inside the boundaries of the U.S. Steel Clairton Coke Works facility, the company collected monitoring data during those same 2 years that showed 24-hour average concentrations of benzene ranging from 123 to as high as 620 micrograms per cubic meter. To help put this number into context, the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, a professional association that publishes recommended occupational standards to protect workers, established an 8-hour workplace threshold of 60 micrograms per cubic meter. So that is the recommended exposure level is 60, and we have concentrations that range from between 123 to 620 micrograms per cubic meter. The Clairton Coke Works plant also has a long record of violating the Clean Air Act, with 14 enforcement actions and nearly 10.7 million in penalties assessed over 5 years, according to EPA's Enforcement and Compliance History online database. Unfortunately, our research showed that the Clairton Coke Works plant is not alone in industry. For example, at the ABC Coke plant in Alabama, 4 of 12 air pollution monitors detected 6-month average concentrations of benzene above the long-term health threshold at the facility's perimeter in 2022 and 2023, with one monitor measuring 6-month average concentrations more than 4 times the long-term threshold. The company measured 24-hour average benzene concentrations inside the plant boundaries as high as 100 micrograms per cubic meter during those same 2 years. In Indiana, at the Cleveland Cliffs Burns Harbor plant, the highest 24-hour average benzene concentration recorded inside the plant boundaries in 2022 and 2023 was 910 micrograms per cubic meter. In Indiana, one air pollution monitor at the U.S. Steel Gary Works registered a 6-month average concentration of chromium at the facility's fence line in 2022 that was more than double the long-term or chronic health threshold identified in our report. In Illinois, a monitor measured a 6-month average concentration of chromium that was 45% higher than the long-term or chronic health threshold during 2022. According to EPA records, the U.S. Steel plants in Clairton, Gary, and Granite City, and the Cleveland Cliffs plant in Burns Harbor are chronic violators of the Clean Air Act. In fact, 11 of the 20 plants we examined have regularly violated the law in the past 3 years, according to EPA records. Of the remaining 9 plants, including the Drummond ABC Coke plant, 8 were subject to at least one enforcement action in the past 5 years. All of this makes painfully clear the risks that steel workers and steel communities face every day. Steel is an essential material for modern life, but it can't be, and it doesn't have to be, at the expense of the health and safety of workers and the individuals that live near these plants. Modernizing and cleaning up the steelmaking industry should be a goal shared by everyone, and delaying common sense rules that require an accurate accounting of hazardous air pollution and action to fix pollution problems is a big step in the wrong direction for workers and steel communities across the U.S. Again, thank you all for being here. I look forward to answering your questions at the end of our conference, and I'll hand it back to you, Tom.
Thanks. That was Jen Duggan, Executive Director of the Environmental Integrity Project. In the chat, I put a link to an online data map that one of our researchers, Louisa Markow, created. Check it out. We have all the numbers that Jen was talking about now, along with the compliance records of all the steel plants in the U.S. and the voices of community members speaking out on this issue. So check out that data map. It's in the link in the chat. It's also on our website, on our press release. Also, in our report that you can find on our website, we have fact sheets for each state. For Pennsylvania, for Indiana, for Alabama, for Ohio. We have fact sheets for U.S. Steel and the other steel companies, so you can see how your state is doing in terms of compliance and pollution levels and how the local company is doing. So check those out as well. Our next speaker is Kiam Ansari, the Executive Director of Valley Clean Air Now in Pennsylvania. Go ahead, Kiam.
Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Kiam Ansari. I am the Executive Director of Valley Clean Air Now. When the explosion hit Clairton last week, our community once again faced the reality of living next to one of the most extensive coke facilities in the country. VCAN was on the ground immediately, organizing emergency distributions of air purifiers, masks, and water to give families some protection. But no emergency response can undo the daily exposure to hazardous air that the people here live with. That's why the NESHAP rules, especially fence line monitoring, are so critical. These rules finally require companies like U.S. Steel to prove with real data the pollution that is escaping into our neighborhoods. Benzene is not just a number on a chart, it is a cancer-causing chemical that families in Clairton breathe every day. Without fence line monitoring, the company's self-reported emissions leave us all in the dark. With it, we have a tool that forces accountability and corrective action when those levels are too high. VCAN has been fighting for this kind of transparency because we know what is at stake, and our children deserve to grow up without asthma and cancer risk hanging over them. Our elders deserve to breathe without fear that every day it shortens their lives. Fence line monitoring is not optional. It is the bare minimum needed for justice. Rolling back these protections once again sacrifices Clairton and the Mon Valley to industrial pollution. But we will not accept that. VCAN will continue to stand with residents and demand enforcement of these NESHAP rules, the continuation of fence line monitoring, and stronger protections for frontline communities. Our message is simple. The health of the people must come before profits of polluters. That's why fence line monitoring is not just a technical rule, it is a lifeline. The Biden administration's 2024 rules required benzene monitoring at coke plants and chromium monitoring at steel mills. Finally, it gave communities a way to hold polluters accountable. These rules say that if dangerous levels of carcinogens are detected at the fence line, companies must take corrective action. At refineries, similar monitoring requirements cut the number of facility exceeding benzene standards in half within just 3 years. And the same progress is possible for steel and coke plants if these rules are allowed to stand. But today, these protections are under threat. The Trump administration is delaying and attempting to roll back these common sense safeguards. That means people in Clairton and the broader Mon Valley could once again be left in the dark about the toxic air that we are breathing. Rolling back these protections would lock us into a cycle of fear, illness, and environmental injustice. And it would tell communities like mine that our health is expendable. The truth is clear. Steel may be essential to our economy, but our lives are essential too. Fence line monitoring is the bare minimum of what justice requires. We need stronger enforcement, investment in clean technologies, and a real commitment to protecting public health. The explosion last week is a warning that the costs of delay are too high. And I stand here to say that the Mon Valley is not disposable. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Kiam Ansari, Executive Director of Valley Clean Air Now in Pennsylvania. Next, we have Jermaine Patterson, a resident of Clairton, Pennsylvania, who lives near the U.S. Steel Clairton Coke Works. Go ahead, Jermaine.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am a lifetime Mon Valley resident. I've been in Clairton for 20 years. It'll be 20 years in September. And first, I want to speak to the incident that happened August the 11th. So it's not unusual for community members to hear loud booms and bangs in Clairton. It's not unusual for us to experience pollution on a daily basis, but this particular day was different. I personally, I heard it. I felt it more than anything. You know, sometimes when it rains and it thunderstorms, you can hear, the cracks from the thunder, and it may shake your house a little bit. This was totally different. I can physically feel my body move. That's how loud it was, and that's how alarming it was. I immediately ran from room to room to see, possibly I was home by myself. It was just me and my cat. I ran from room to room to see, what could have happened. What was that? Did my window air conditioners fall? At the same time, I thought that could not have done that. So I ran outside. I looked up the street. I looked down the street. I saw a neighbor further down washing his car. I thought, well, maybe it was a car accident because sometimes you can physically feel the impact from a car accident if it hit a building nearby. It wasn't that. I came back in the house and I immediately went to Facebook, and neighbors were experiencing the same thing that I did. And then I found out that it was coming from U.S. Steel, that there was an explosion. It was a scary day. The county told community members to shut their windows, to keep their doors closed, don't come outside. Which are I think are good precautions. However, we're in August; it's hot. The pollution that is outside is always in the home, and so it's not always safe to be indoors enclosed. So I just wanted to paint a picture of what that day was like, and what community members had to experience that day, and what just a typical day in a community that also has a big industry within it. I also want to mention that I hosted a benzene monitor from December 2021 to June 2023. And my monitor number, I know this information is going to be shared. So my monitor number was number 6. And though my numbers were not the highest, it was, I think mine was the third lowest. And so there was benzene present. And so just because it was not the highest does not mean that it is not going to affect anyone's health. So me being the host of that monitor also tells me that my neighbors are experiencing the same thing. And so I urge whoever is responsible for making that change. We definitely need fence line monitoring. That's crucial. And it's our lives are worth it, right? At least we can have that protection. We also need, I want to say, we also need an alert system in the community. That goes hand in hand. One of my neighbors I called down the street, she didn't even hear it. She's elderly, right? She didn't even hear it. So that tells me that it's unsafe. That's
All
it.
right. Thank you. That was Jermaine Patterson of Clairton, Pennsylvania. Next, we have Terry Stiegel, former steel worker who lives in northern Indiana. Go ahead, Terry.
Thanks for having me, and let's all join together to make sure we make this place a better place to live. My name is Terry Stiegel. I'm a retired steel worker who worked 41 years at Inland Steel, now Cleveland Cliffs in East Chicago, Indiana, and adjacent to the steel mill there. Just for reference for people, we have one of the biggest oil refineries in the country, BP. It just had a disaster also with some flooding problems that created some environmental problems in the neighborhood. But with that, the steel industry has been polluting Northwest Indiana for over 100 years. And Mother Earth is telling us she has had enough with the impact of climate change happening right in the front of us. And I guess these torrential rains we had here in Northwest Indiana is a good example of that. Even with the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, EPA has given the steel industry legal limits to pollute the air, land, water with severe negative impact on the environmental and health of the people living in the steel communities. There are no special pollution domes to capture all the air pollution of a steel mill. Instead, the air pollution of a steel mill blows all over the surrounding communities depending on the direction of the wind. I always tell people we better not screw up that big blue out there referencing Lake Michigan, because EPA allows industry legal limits to pollute Lake Michigan. The legal limit to pollute Lake Michigan from industry water discharge should be 0. And we have the technology to do 0 legal limits. I've testified at numerous EPA and IDEM public meetings, hearings to lower limits on air and water discharge pollution that seems to go on deaf ears at EPA and IDEM. And for reference, IDEM is the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. If we care about the future generations, we must set a goal of zero pollution. We've got to demand a future with clean, sustainable steel that keeps our jobs and our communities safe here in Northwest Indiana. EPA's decision to delay critical rules designed to protect us from toxic emission perpetuates the unfortunate trend of treating the region as a toxic sacrifice zone for industry to poison the land, the air, the water, and the people. The steel industry has to do better to be better if we're going to have a sustainable steel industry into the future. Green steel technology can take us into the future to eliminate the pollution. We need green hydrogen, direct reduction iron furnaces, and electric arc furnaces for green steel. That eliminates the coke plant, the blast furnace for pig iron, and the basic oxygen furnace for steel. Nippon said they are going to invest $1 billion over the next 10 years with $300 million to reline the blast furnace is just a shutdown plan for Gary Works. If Gary Works were to shut down in 15 to 20 years, it would end up a 4,000 acre polluted wasteland on the lakefront. And believe me, in our area, we've seen a lot of these disasters happen over the years with steel mills shutting down. U.S. Steel, Nippon Steel needs the blast furnace at Gary Works to feed the pig iron billet caster, to ship pig iron to the Big River plant in Arkansas to make quality steel till they can upgrade the Big River plant with direct reduction iron furnaces. And this is an important factor why they want to reline the blast furnace and Gary Works. And like I said, it's not a long-term plan, it's a short-term plan. So we need to make sure we're doing the right things to pressure them. We have to demand U.S. Steel, Nippon Steel invest $10 to $12 billion over the next 10 years to transition Gary Works to a green steel technology. We want U.S. Steel, Nippon Steel, Gary Works to be around for another 100 plus years with green steel technology. And this is the way we need to go in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Terry Stiegel from Northern Indiana, former steel worker. We're going to open up to questions from reporters. Reporters, we'd love to get your questions, love to get your thoughts. Please go down to the bottom of your screen and look for the Q&A tab and put a note in the Q&A tab, and then I'll unmute you. You can ask your question. But first, I see a caller from Alabama. Charlie, I wonder if that's Charlie Powell, 205-1987. Is that you, Charlie Powell? I unmuted that phone number from Alabama, 1987. Is that Charlie Powell? Okay, Charlie probably wasn't able to make it there. That's okay. All right, so reporters, love to get your questions. Our first question is coming from Anya Litvak of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Anya, I'm unmuting you. Also unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I had a question about some of the numbers in the report. In table 4, when it talks about the average benzene concentrations at the various monitors and also gives the average 6-month benzene concentration, the delta C value. Why is that? How is it possible for that delta C value to be higher than the average concentration at the highest monitor at most of these facilities?
Tyler Wegline, the author of the report. Go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Anya. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen real quick if I can.
Yeah, I'm going to allow that. Go ahead.
All right. So this is going to just make it easier to explain. And so this is can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is the story map that Tom shared, and part of it does include a section on the fence line monitoring data. And so this is Clairton Coke Works in Pennsylvania, and the the red dots of varying shades are the 12 fenceline benzene monitors with, darker shades corresponding to higher benzene concentrations. And so the reason that you can get a higher delta C value compared to average concentrations is because the delta C value is calculated across the entire fence line during a sampling period, whereas the average concentrations that we report in table 4, that's for an individual monitor. So during a sampling period, the delta C value is calculated by taking the difference between the highest measured concentration and the lowest measured concentration during that 2-week period. And so, 1 week you can have wind blowing from the west. So you might have, monitor 10 have the highest concentration and monitor 4 have the lowest concentration. And then the next sampling period, you might have wind blowing from the south. And so, the highest concentration could be at monitor 11, and the lowest could be at monitor 5. And so that's how, because of shifting winds during different sampling periods, that's how the delta C value, which again is for the entire fence line, can be higher than the average over that same time period for the monitor that measured the highest average concentration. Does that make sense, Anya?
To kind of put that in context real quick, it's kind of like the delta C value is like the net benzene level, and the system tries to cancel out benzene that might be blowing onto the site from a highway, for example, and show only the net benzene level that is apparently allegedly coming from that facility. So that delta C is kind of like the net benzene level that they use as a kind of a regulatory measure. Anyways, Anya, does that answer your question?
I think so. Let me, if I could just repeat this back to you and see if I'm getting it
Yeah.
right. So basically, there might be one monitor that is overall the highest, but that might not be the monitor that is responsible. There might be various monitors that are responsible for some of the higher deltas. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, because so the delta C value, the monitors that I use in that calculation might change for each 2-week sampling period depending on where the wind is blowing from.
I see.
That's why that again the delta C value can be higher than the highest average concentration measured at a single monitor.
Got it. Okay. Thank you so much.
Great. Does that answer your question, or you have another one, Anya? Are you good?
No, that answers it. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Next, we have a question from Mike Ludwig of Truth Out. Let me unmute you, Mike. I'm unmuting you. Also unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, this is for Ansari or our community member here. Just real quick, I was just wondering if you could speak a little more on the health impacts you've seen doing environmental justice work, like specifically from benzene. If you know of people getting sick, or if you feel like you see more health impacts in your community than in other communities in the area. And also, like, I'm visiting Pittsburgh right now and just thinking about how the hills and the valleys might help concentrate pollution or kind of keep it hanging around. So yeah, those are my questions.
Yeah, thank you for that so much. So I'll just say, you're absolutely right to identify some of the geography that creates some additional challenges for us. Something that we face here in the Mon Valley are inversions. So whenever there's some temperature differences, a lot of the pollution gets stuck in the valleys. And we have, high pollution days. So, the benzene that is being put out does and can be delivered into homes at higher concentrations. And so that is something that we absolutely, suffer from here. As far as health effects, we have, I think we're in the 90th percentile for air toxic cancer risk. We have, the children at Clairton School. There's a recent asthma study done that 1 out of 3 kids suffers from asthma. We have high rates of COPD, cancer. So it is no secret that the Mon Valley is sick. It is no secret who is putting out these, carcinogens. Some other tangential evidence that I could say is, we had someone else who was part of this process that had a monitor in their home, the Meckles in Glassport. And, she suffered from a lot of the ailments that benzene was giving her. She had anemia and a bunch of other effects. They actually moved to Butler after, Trump essentially got rid of these rules. And her doctor said it is miraculous how much better she feels. Her husband Dave, wasn't able to mow his lawn without losing his breath. Last time I spoke to him, he can mow his lawn. He has acres for hours. So it is absolutely having an effect on people. And which is why this fence line monitoring for benzene is really the bare minimum, because it at least would tell us what is out there and what we are suffering from. Um, and so people can actually take the proper precautions, protect their health and their family's health. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Great. All right, our next question is from John Hurdle. And John, I'm going to unmute you, unmute yourself as well, and ask your question.
Yeah, hi everybody. You talk about various violations of health levels for emissions of various kinds at these different plants, and I'd just like somebody to be clear on what are the health standards that are being violated. Are they from the EPA or do they come from somewhere else?
Tyler Wegline, do you want to tackle that one?
Sure.
I'm-
So I went ahead and
Oh, go
included
ahead.
a text response
Okay.
in response to the question with some links, but these are what are called reference exposure levels from California's Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. So these are standards that they don't have any legal enforceability in this case, but they do these are the levels at which non-cancer health effects may occur. And so they have these reference exposure levels for both acute exposures, which are intermittent 1 hour exposures, as well as chronic or long-term exposures, which are defined as continuous exposures over at least 8 years. And so that's what we're referencing in the report.
Okay, so just to be
And
clear, this is these are the California health standards, not any standards that are set by the federal government or anybody else, right?
well, I'll just jump in, Tyler, because I think there's
Please.
sort of two things that this is Jen at EIP. There's two things I think that we're comparing. One is um the health, the reference exposure levels that Tyler has mentioned, and to be able to explain and contextualize the concentrations that the industry detected at their fence lines and inside the facility. That is those are the reference thresholds that Tyler mentioned. There are also violations of the Clean Air Act that we have not identified specific violations, in the report, but based on EPA's ECHO data, there are actual violations of the Clean Air Act that have been identified by the EPA at these facilities. And those can be for a number of different kinds of violations. That's separate from the industry reported benzene and chromium concentration. So I just want to be clear that because there are no standards in place at this time, the concentrations that we're seeing at the fence line and inside the facility are not necessarily violations of the law. However, based on the California threshold levels, based on the worker safety recommendations, they are unhealthy for long-term exposure for both workers, and in the community. And that is why these rules are so critical, that we keep in place the fence line monitoring and cleanup so that communities and workers know what the actual emissions are, and the companies have the information they need to proactively fix pollution problems. Um, I think that, in case it's helpful, because there's sort of two things that we looked at, in this report. And one was, are there unhealthy or dangerous levels of benzene and chromium pollution at the fence lines here at these facilities? And then two, what is their compliance record with other provisions, of the Clean Air Act?
Okay, thank you.
And John, if you want to find out those Clean Air Act violation numbers, you can go to our story map that I linked to in the chat. Also in our report, that's from EPA's Enforcement and Compliance History Online database that talks about the actual Clean Air Act violations versus the health potential impact according to the other reference standard from California that we mentioned. Okay, next we have a question from Julia Berdelsky of the Pittsburgh Tribune Review. Go ahead, Julia.
Hi, thank you for taking our questions. I appreciate it. Pennsylvania and Allegheny County officials have been telling us here that they have not seen any pollution beyond the legal limits in the immediate aftermath of the explosion at Clairton Coke Works last week. Just curious to see if I can hear, your reaction to that. Are there other types of pollutants or environmental concerns beyond what might have initially been analyzed, or any more delayed effects that folks should be keeping an eye on?
Jen Duggan, do you want to tackle that one? Or Kiam?
Yeah, I just wanted to say a couple of things about that. First and foremost, we have to understand that U.S. Steel right now is not operating at full capacity because they have lost a lot of their coke ovens. So there's not going to be as much pollution being produced right now. And so, I think that for us, that is a good thing. Now, I think the dangers for us are during the aftermaths of these explosions. So if you want to go back to 2018, there was a small fire, not an explosion, that took place. For months after that, you had hydrogen sulfide exceedances that sent a lot of people to the hospital, it harmed a lot of people in the community. That was also during inversion season. During the fall, when it gets colder in the morning, heats up during the evening. That is what we're concerned about. The long-term dangers of hot idling batteries that are no longer in operation. We're worried about a proper investigation being done this time to make sure the full scope of what needs to be redone and rebuilt in that facility is actually being done. The only maintenance and fixes that are currently being done at Clairton Coke Works are the result of a lawsuit. There is no money being allocated from the investment from the Pond Steel into this facility. So these are just the facts on the ground. There was an explosion. It's great that there was no additional harm to the community as far as air pollution and exposure goes. But this is not over. And we need to stay vigilant until we understand exactly how long we're going to be operating under these new rules.
All right. Thank you. Our next question is from Rebecca Thiel from Indiana Public Radio. Go ahead, Rebecca. I'm going to unmute you. Unmute yourself as well.
Hi, thank you for the question. I'm not quite sure who this is for, but I just wanted to kind of get a sense of where the clean hydrogen technology is at. As you know, the Trump administration has defunded many of the hydrogen hubs that were meant to kind of scale up that green hydrogen for steelmakers, among other industries. So, where does that leave the steel industry? And what impact does that have on steelmakers moving toward a greener form of steelmaking?
Jen Duggan, you want to try that one?
I don't think that I'm really the one to speak to that. I don't know if Terry has any thoughts based on the conversations that they've been having. But I think that there is a lot of uncertainty and complexity with respect to these hydrogen hubs, some of which are um, not necessarily green. You know, they are blue hydrogen, and could be based on, fossil fuels. So I think there's a lot of complexity around what is and isn't green steel, what is and isn't, clean hydrogen. Um, and I don't have an answer, and also just uncertainty around these hydrogen projects, going forward in light of the clawback on the funding. So I don't have a good answer to that, but maybe Terry or Kiam does in terms
Yeah,
of the local impact.
Kiam, do you have some thoughts on that?
Yes, so this is something that, we've been watching quite closely. And to my knowledge, the oil and gas industry is essentially fighting back against anything that dares to take away market share. Hydrogen is just one of those industries that was sacrificed. They're also going after wind and solar, and moving to oil and gas. Like Jen said, the hydrogen that was being bought and paid for by the federal government, it was the entire spectrum of hydrogen, from green on through pink, which is, has some nuclear, green being the cleanest. Um, and a lot of that infrastructure costs hundreds of millions of dollars to build out. And the reason why the industry did not want to utilize that technology is because the infrastructure is not there. They don't want to take the cost. So essentially, when you have the Department of Energy being gutted and none of those programs being implemented, what we have seen is, at least for Cleveland Cliffs, who is a still operator, that did have at least two projects to try to implement some of these greener technologies to try to decarbonize steel to some extent. We know that the only project that they were actually able to move forward with was using blue hydrogen, and blue hydrogen being something that uses natural gas. And the larger investment that they had for 500 million was cut. And so what we see is, the federal government essentially shunning clean technology and running towards oil and gas and coal. They've made that a critical mineral now. And so it is a complete shift in the opposite direction. And unfortunately for industry, we do not see the type of investment needed not only to maintain how they are operating right now within safety standards, but to move forward and invest large sums of money to these larger, riskier, hopefully more sustainable technologies.
All right. Thank you. Our next question is from Reed Frazier from the Allegheny Front. Reed, I'm going to unmute you. Also unmute yourself.
Thanks for having this call, and for taking my question. I have maybe one or two questions just to follow on what you guys had. The first is, I just want to clarify the point that Anya Litvak was trying to figure out, which was, if I'm reading this right, the sort of the difference between the delta C and the, I'm sorry to quibble or go back to this, but the table 4 in the report with the benzene concentrations, these were measured, correct me if I'm wrong, these are measured by the local groups that did the monitoring, not the EPA ordered monitoring that the companies did?
No, this is the monitoring that is conducted by the companies at EPA's request as part of the rulemaking.
Okay. And it says 6-month average fence line benzene delta C value is for Clairton is 33, but then the individual monitor 6-month average is 26, 25.9. I'm sorry, I maybe a little dense here, but can you explain?
It's okay. Yeah. Um, so let me bring up that map again to try to walk through it again. But um, again, one thing to remember is the delta C, the monitors that are going to be used, it's going to vary from sampling period to sampling period, depending on where the prevailing winds are coming from, which impacts which monitors are going to have the highest and lowest concentrations. And so when we talk about just the individual monitor averages, that's just, at that monitor over 6 months, what was the average concentration? The delta C value, again, instead of, calculating an average at an individual point, and instead treats the fence line as one unit. And so again, with this hypothetical example, during sampling period 1, for example, let's say, you have wind coming from the west. And so monitor 10 would probably have the highest benzene concentration, and then monitor 3 might have the lowest. And so you would use the difference between those two monitors to calculate the delta C value for that sampling period. And then you go to the next 2-week sampling period and say
Which
the
is like
wind
a
is coming.
net reading. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And then, so then
It's like the net.
sampling period 2, say the wind is coming from the south. And so, it might be, monitor 11 that has the highest concentration for that sampling period, and maybe like monitor 6 that has the lowest. And so you would use, the difference or the net value between those two monitors to come up with the delta C for that sampling period. And so over 6 months, you're going to do that 13 different times. And so in each sampling period, chances are the pair of monitors that are being used are going to be different. And so that's how, with a shift in the prevailing winds between sampling periods, that's how delta C value can be higher than if you just look across individual monitors what the highest average is. Does that make sense?
Go ahead, Jen.
I was just gonna add one thing because I think this might be helpful. Read if you look at the highest 2-week average concentration from the monitors, it's 96.2 micrograms per cubic meter. So when it's important to look at, each sample period is a 2-week average. So for Clairton, the highest 2-week concentration was 96.2 micrograms per cubic meter. So that is what is, you're looking at a 2-week average. We've calculated, to be conservative, the 6-month averages, because we're thinking about benzene exposure over the long term. Like, what are people exposed to? What are workers exposed to day after day? So we're not just looking at the 2-week average concentration. We also have calculated the 6-month average concentration as well. But if you look at the highest 2-week average at Clairton, it's well above the delta C value. It's 96.2 micrograms per cubic meter.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. That leads me to my next question, which is basically what would the costs of complying with the latest coke oven regulations be at a place like Clairton? The EPA did some calculations and found, I think it was the figure was pretty low. It was the total for the industry would be $9 million a year, or I can't remember if that was a yearly total or over a decade. But in any case, it was not break the bank number for an industry that big to comply with the coke oven regulations, and that would include monitoring. But the rule required them, if they sort of exceeded the allowable limit, whatever that was, and I think it fluctuated over the course of the rulemaking, but it was all above what Clairton has demonstrated. It's almost certain that Clairton would fail the test according to your data or the data in this table. It would be higher than the threshold, whatever the EPA set. they'd have to come up with a plan to lower coke oven emissions. So the industry did their own calculation, and they found that the cost to comply could be as much as $3 billion across the entire sector, which is a lot and would, have economic, impact on their operations and their decisions on what they do with all their plants. So I guess I'm wondering, like, have you guys looked at what the industry is claiming would be the true cost of complying with the coke oven rules? And my next part of the question is there, it's sort of like the perpetual question here, is there a way to do this kind of steel making that doesn't produce these kinds of benzene levels at the fence line? In other words, is there an engineering solution that is sitting out there that US Steel or Nippon Steel is just not looking at?
I think on the cost question, Reed, I would just note that EPA, when doing these two rules, found this to be cost effective for the industry. It is a low cost technology, easy to install and operate and maintain. And refineries have been doing this for more than a decade, and they're still going strong. I think that the fence line monitoring and cleanup standards, as I think Kiam noted in his remarks, it's really almost a check on whether or not the facility is in compliance with the existing laws, the existing emission limits that they're required to meet. So the fence line monitoring and action levels here are to provide accountability and transparency to ensure that the industry is complying with their permits, with their emission limits. Looking at the Biden EPA found this to be cost effective. There's information in the record to show that it is. And again, refineries have been doing this successfully for some time, as well as even some chemical plants where they have been required to do that, under enforcement orders. So I would, that's how I would respond on the cost question. And Terry, I see your
Terry,
hand up.
yeah, go ahead, Terry Stiegel.
Okay, I have two things I want to say, but to answer the gentleman that's on the call right now, I mean, it's real simple. We need the steel industry to start investing in direct reduction iron furnaces, and you don't need a coke plant. So that solves the problem all the way around. So they need to shift their investments to do the right things for the future, for one thing, and eliminate the pollution that's killing people in communities. So that is the direction we need to go. And coke plants can be run pretty efficient if you have the newer technology and you maintain them. And typically they don't. So that's the issue there with coke plants. And I think there's one other issue we need to touch on. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I wanted to make sure we answered everyone's questions by the hour. I see Kalia Gunderson has your hand raised. Kalia, do you have a question? I'm going to unmute you. Kalia Gunderson?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kaylee Gunderson. I'm with WTAE in Pittsburgh. Let me pull up table 4. So I just wanted some clarification. It says that the Clairton Coke plant faced 14 enforcement actions in the last 5 years, whereas the Cleveland Cliffs Sun Coke in Indiana faced significantly more, yet the fines, or the penalties, I should say, was pretty high. I think the highest on the list for Clairton. Could you just explain kind of the difference there in terms of what, those penalties might have been that cost Clairton Coke so much?
I think the penalties of any kind of enforcement action related to violations of the law depend upon the seriousness of the violation, the impact to the community with respect to the environmental releases. So, what the economic benefit was to the company for avoiding compliance with the law for that period of time. So there are a number of different factors that come into play when calculating these kinds of enforcement penalties. So it could really be based on a lot of different factors.
All right. We're at the hour now. So, Terry, do you have one last thing you wanted to say to wrap things up?
Yes, I think this green hydrogen is important too, that people understand it. Green hydrogen is made from water and electricity and has no CO2. In our area, we were pushing the Department of Energy to go with the green hydrogen versus the blue hydrogen, which is made from natural gas, and they have to have a carbon capture component with that. Well, BP was pushing for the blue hydrogen because, of course, they wanted to and go with the natural gas to keep their fossil fuel things going, and also with the excessive danger there is with these carbon capture pipelines. They were going to have to run a pipeline 90 miles south from here and go through all these communities. And what happens when these pipelines explode, they take all the oxygen out of the atmosphere. So you can't breathe, and emergency vehicles can't even get to the people they need to be if they're gas vehicles. And then the other thing they have to do is they were going 90 miles away because they were going to inject this stuff about 6,000 or 7,000 feet underground on some of these farms. So it's a whole boondoggle as far as trying to do blue hydrogen, and that's why we need the people to get on board with the green hydrogen.
All right. Sean Riley, did you have a question? I don't know if you do, I'm going to unmute you. Are you okay, Sean?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to ask, as you know, EPA under the Trump administration has delayed compliance both for integrated steel makers, basically Cleveland Cliffs and U.S. Steel, as well as the coke industry from compliance with updated hazardous air pollution rules released last year. Do you see any opportunity under this administration to strengthen federal regulations on the industry, or are any steps to reduce its emissions going to have to come from the industry itself?
I think that we are asking for the Trump administration to keep the current rules in place that the Biden administration promulgated in 2024. That is a really important first step in transparency and accountability for the industry. As we've noted, it's not enough, but it is a very important first step. So this is not strengthening. This is not rolling back, or weakening, which is what's happening, with the Trump administration efforts to delay compliance with these rules. And EIP and other advocates and allies across the country have challenged those regulatory rollbacks by the Trump administration in court.
All right. And Reed Frazier, do you have one final question? Sean, does that answer your question, Sean?
Yes.
Okay, great. Reed Frazier, do you have one last question? Are you all set?
I'm all set. I forgot to lower my hand.
All right, perfect. All right. Well, thanks to everyone for spending this time talking to us about this issue. Once again, check out the story data map we have on our website, www.environmentalintegrity.org. It's got data on all the local plants. It's got voice of local community members. It's got the compliance records of all the plants in your local area. So check that out. Also, at the back of our report on our website are fact sheets for Pennsylvania, for Indiana, for Ohio, for the different companies. So if you want to do a little watchdog report on your local company or your local state, check out those fact sheets at the back of our report. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to call me at 443-510-2574 or send me an email, tpelton@environmentalintegrity.org. Otherwise, thanks to all our panelists, thanks to all the journalists, and have a great afternoon.